Adam, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Just start by telling us a little bit about your early days in business, and you've got a really unique background educationally and from a work perspective. I'm really interested in these early days, how you got from where you started to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Apologies for doing this, but it's going to have to go back to school for one sec. Failing school, shit at school. Every lunchtime I used to ring up my stockbroker on the only landline in the school, trade shares all lunchtime, hang up the phone, go back to class. And so I was always known as a slightly weird kind of guy, played the share market at lunch, and that was unusual. But I was failing school, had to go see a tutor. Tutor said, "What are your interests?" And I said, "Money and people. Really interested in people, really interested in money and commerce." And that person said I should become a consumer psychologist. And as soon as he said that, I thought, my gosh, that is exactly what I want to do.
Really?
It's a weird story. I didn't really know what it was. So I got degrees in psychology, did my thesis in clinical psychology and identifying the underlying constructs of cool people. So I wanted to make that as commercialized as possible in my research and got a Bachelor of Commerce. Got sidetracked into forensic psychology for a while. So worked in the prison system, worked in private practice, assessing people for court and that kind of thing, but wanted to get back into consumer psychology, which I did. And then I got my first kind of job in the world of advertising when I was like 30 or something.
Okay. There's a lot to unpack there, and it's very interesting and I think very unique. You talked about you're interested in money. In what way? There's obvious ways, but what was the motivator there? What does that mean to you?
In the 80s, there's a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And my uncle, Ron Wise, was quite a well-known businessman in Perth. And my dad was a public servant. And so I identified as having this Rich Dad, Poor Dad thing.
Yeah.
And so he taught me how to play the share market. They always had lots of toys lying around their house all the time, and they had a winery and just lots of cool shit going on. And I like the idea that money gave you access to that kind of stuff. And within that, I guess, I've always been fascinated by brands and marketing and the influence they have on people and popular culture in general, and our interrelationship with why we buy things, the types of things we buy, how we express ourselves through those things. And so it's always just been money and consumerism and a sense of identity has always been fascinating to me.
Yeah, those psychological drivers, right? That's what you're getting to. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's right. And then, so psychology and commerce feels like a good mix of those things put together.
And it's almost an unsolvable puzzle, right? You can learn and work as much as all of these things as you can, but it's a never-ending puzzle, which makes it interesting.
Yeah, there's a saying, there's a formula: actual self plus brand equals ideal self. But within that though, there's a lot to unpack, as you say, and we're dealing with really ephemeral, emotive, difficult concepts to try to unpack and understand. And then it's even more difficult to systematize those and replicate and build a business model of them because it's all soft and gooey. Yeah. So it is difficult, but it's fascinating. There's been lots of inroads into making it more scientific and predictable over the last 10, 15 years in terms of what we do.
Yeah, it's in many aspects too, right? Even in terms of finance and the things that drive people. That's the part I want to touch on further later on. But in terms of business, what was your first steps into business post trading the stock market in your lunch break?
I always had a job. I always had at least one job since I was 12. First job, picking up golf balls on the driving range, and I did KFC, Hungry Jack's, Claremont Fresh Markets at the time, loads of jobs. Then started a wood delivery business called the Friendly Woodies, and the Friendly Woodies would go around, we'd buy a wood in bulk, chop it up and sell it. But Perth, which is where I grew up, the winters are quite short and wet and not that cold.
Yeah.
And the wood delivery business, we made enough money over 2 seasons to have a couple of really good parties. That didn't do particularly well. So I always wanted to make money, but I've never been that good at, once it comes in, of knowing how to manage it myself or particularly caring even that much. It's more about the creative pursuit. I think, and building the thing where the money comes in, I'm really interested in. I'm interested in the right kind of business to build.
Yep.
And then the money thing isn't as interesting anymore. And I know this, I know your business and so forth, and money is what you guys do. It's not what turns me on anymore, or that's been belted out of me a bit. Have you heard of, there's a psychologist called Paul Piff who looks at the psychological impact of money and playing with money and the impact it has on you psychologically. And he's got loads and loads of different types of experiments. Whereas if you're primed with money or primed to think about money, you do become more self-aware, you collaborate less with other people, you tend to worry about your own goals more than others. And it can have quite an impact on people. And so I've learned that over the years.
The psychology of all of that is absolutely fascinating. You talk about that. You're talking about creating the machine that makes the money and the puzzle that goes with making that machine and building it. The money is the outcome, or one of the outcomes that flows from that. And in some respects, it's boring, that part of it. And it's even less in many cases for people when you talk to them. It's less about the actual money. It's more about the freedom or the lifestyle or whatever that does for you, whatever it might be. And even myself, I love what I do around managing the money, but I actually love the puzzle of working out what all these things are, what's happening in the world, all the geopolitical risks, all those. I love the puzzle. Yeah. It's less about money for money's sake. It's around the intellectual stimulation that comes with it.
Yeah, it's like a big game.
To me, it's fun. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. So I totally get that. Take me back to the part where you went to the prison system for a bit. What's the thinking there?
Got degrees in psychology and commerce, needed job, like being intellectually stimulated. I don't know, forensic psychology was cool. Corelli was on TV at the time, and it just felt like an interesting place to go. I went there and I absolutely loved it. So I worked at the MRRC at Long Bay. I worked in a country prison in Oberon and Bathurst. And what I learned there was, by understanding the extremes of people, it makes it really obvious what people's motivations are, because you're operating extremes. So it's like putting human behavior under a magnifying glass.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what drives us. It's so clear to see. And so I absolutely loved that. And then I got a job in a marketing consultancy and still went in on the weekends to do court reports for court and stuff. And so I was working basically 7 days a week for a few years as I was doing my advertising job during the week and then working in the prisons on the weekend. Yeah, it's good.
Well, what's the single biggest insight that you gained into people? It might not be easy to answer off the top of your head, but between seeing those two different ends of the spectrum of dealing with people who are in prisons and at the other end, people who are the ultimate consumers and brands and those types of things, what were the things that stood out? Was there a juxtaposition in the psychology?
I reckon that there's two things that stand out. First of all, no behavior happens as a one-off. So nothing happens impulsively. So we operate in patterns of behavior. So if you're doing something now, if you and I are having some form of interaction now, you are likely to go away and have a similar interaction with lots and lots of other people, because that's how you operate. Same as me. So if I punch you in the head now, chances are I've punched somebody else in the head before and have done that a number of times and I haven't got away with it for whatever reason. That's the first one, patterns of behavior. Second one is a little bit more moral, and that is we're all just trying to get by. So I remember dealing with this one guy in the prison system, and he'd done a horrible crime of digging up graves and doing something weird to the bones and stuff like that. And when I started to interview him, he got really agitated, and then he stood up, punched the wall next to my head and put a hole in the wall. And I just said, mate, you're really scaring me. He then said, well, that kind of almost fell back and started crying and saying, this is what I do, this is what I do, I scare people, I'm sorry. And it was the most clear kind of moment to me that this person wasn't trying to be bad or evil. He was just trying to get by, and he was completely inadequate. And I think we're all just trying to get by, and nobody's trying to be a cock. No one's trying to be evil. We're all just trying to get by with the skills we've got. And some of us inherit good skills, some of us learn them. But I just really feel like everyone is just trying to get by. And I think it's a pretty good foundation for understanding human behavior is they're just trying to they're just trying to get,
Yeah, it applies to everyone, right? Everyone thinks it gets wrapped up in their own lives and their own trying to get by. Sometimes forget that everyone else is just trying to do the same thing in many respects.
That's right.
So you go from there. Now, you've been involved in different businesses along the way. You want to tell us about your first sort of significant business where you thought, hang on, we're doing something quite meaningful here?
So there's a business I got involved in called Naked. Naked started in the UK, and then they had a kind of business model where they released equity to local partners, and then they joined in this kind of thing. So there's 3 local partners and 3 global partners over here, and then around the world there's about 35 partners of this business. We started it in Australia in 2004 and ran that for about 11 years, and then sold it eventually to a company called Photon, which then became an Aero. Who we sold it to was an absolute basket case of an organisation, and they're still on the stock exchange as an Aero, but when we sold it, Photon
was different.
It was different. And but and the reason why I mentioned they're a basket case is because we're a little bit of a basket case as well. And what I learned about that business was we described ourselves as a bunch of brilliant misfits who were just being antagonistic and fucking with the world. It just taught me a lot about culture and taught me a lot about how you can build a brand, and it's all the intangible stuff that's important for the brand. So the basket case people who bought us, who are lovely blokes, by the way, but basket cases, they told me the story, and they were saying, when I found out how cheap you were, I couldn't believe it, because I thought your business was like 10 times bigger than it was. Because the brand was so big, the business was actually quite small compared to the size or the footprint we'd created through the talkability and so on. And that was all. I bring that down to culture, this antagonistic or devilish attitude that we put out into the world. This kind of sense of rebellion within the advertising and marketing landscape. And it made us seem really big and really influential, even though we're a small business. And of course, to a prospective buyer of that business, there's a lot of value in that because they see you having a big influence. And so at Naked, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the value of a brand. I learned a lot about their value of intangible assets around culture and so forth, and how a brand's built.
What was the biggest thing that you learned about brand that you've applied to your businesses?
So I learned 2 things at Naked. I learned that. The other thing I learned was systems and processes are really important. And if you don't have them, you're fucked. And again, that business could have done better with systems and processes. So especially, again, if we come back to that whole thing around what I'm in the business of, which is basically creativity, it's intangible. It relies a lot on confidence and a lot of helping people understand how we do things and why we do them. And so part of that is behavioral sciences and marketing sciences, which I know a fair bit about. But the other part of it is having really good systems and processes so people know where they are in the process of developing things. So that's one. I learned that because we didn't have that at Naked, nor a couple of other things. But then the other thing I've learned is there's no business model in flying under the radar. Your business model needs to have talkability built into it. So whether that be a soft drink, an app, a creative agency, a wealth management company, you have to have talkability built into every facet. So the more you can have talkability built into every facet of what you're doing, then the bigger your brand is going to be, and therefore the more successful your brand's going to be.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to tell us a little bit more, fast forward now to current business, Thinkerbell? Tell us a little bit about that and what you do.
So Thinkerbell, we started 8 years ago, where a proposition is measured magic, which is marketing sciences meets hardcore creativity. And this concept of measured magic drives everything the business does. So our logo is Rodin's The Thinker with Tinkerbell's wings on it, if you can imagine. So it's measured and magic coming together. We have thinkers and tinkers. So we have people who are strategic, partnered with people who are creative, thinkers and tinkers.
Okay.
They drive, those 2 people together drive every account that we have with a little squad around them. We start each week with Measured Monday. We end each week with Magic Hour. We have an internal training program called the Institute of Measured Magic. And so everything is on the service is around creating a brand that can deliver measured magic to our clients. Measured Magic comes to life as a whole lot of different services that we offer. One of the bad things the industry has done over the last 20 years is it siloed itself. So media planning and buying is done by one agency, advertising is done by another, PR is done by another, CX is done by another. And so we've attempted to have a silo-free organisation, and we've tried to mush all of those services back together again. And so within that there is the offer.
You obviously see a lot of different companies with brands, cultures, those sorts of things. What are the most important aspects that you see within those that are really successful?
It's a good question. Very clear, the most important thing. So if I look at, so first of all, the best number of brands to ever have is one. And after that, you're diluting your economies of effort and your economies of scale and so forth. So think Sean Parker's advice to Mark Zuckerberg in the movie The Social Network, where he says, you want one big fish. Nobody remembers the fisherman to go out for 10 different fish. It's just the one big fish. That holds true a lot. To create the one big brand, you really only need maybe three things. Number one, a really clear sense of what the brand stands for. Number two, the mechanics to bring that to life internally and externally. So strong, what we call distinctive brand assets or brand codes. So visuals, look and feel, sound, mnemonics, language, tone of voice, all of that stuff, the mechanics of building the brand. And then three, you need a strong way to disseminate that brand internally first and then externally second. And so the really strong, powerful brands understand that. They understand what their purpose is, or that central organizing thought, number one. Then number two, they've got all the assets to build that internally and externally. And then three, everyone seems to have got the memo within the organization. And then externally, everyone's got the memo. So Fortress, for example, really strong name. There's a good sense of, there's an understanding just purely in that name that if you had a central organizing thought that made sense of that name, and then you've got a logo, which I think looks like a fort, right? But then there's a whole lot of other visual assets that you could have and design assets that could help build that sense of Fortress more. And then if everyone within your organization knew what it was and knew how to speak to that, then that in my head would be does that make sense? A stronger kind of
it makes complete sense. It's very true. And it's one of those things that you talk about these things, but then when you go back into your own business and reflect on them, it's a completely different thought process almost.
Yeah, it is. But it's also pretty easy, right? It's also, people get really hung up on it. And most brands today, because what's happened, the media model is very complicated at the moment. So if you can get a brand working from the inside out, so everything communicates the brand, everything's talkable, then you can rely much less on having to buy media to get the brand in front of people, because the brand is building its own ecosystem, because everyone is touching that brand, understands what that brand's about. So there's brands now, Oatly, which had a market cap at its highest of about $5 billion, and it was on oat milk. And that was their internal creative department was called the Ministry of Mind Control. And they understood their brand better than, from the CEO, the whole organization gets it. And now you see brands like Liquid Death, which is a water brand in the US, a brand called Vacation, which is a skincare brand. It has whipped skin cream, sunscreen. The whole organization, they've just created a very clear brand. The whole organization gets internally, and then it permeates out from there.
Is that obvious to you when you see limited parts of the company, like that company gets it compared to a company that doesn't? Is it that obvious?
Totally. It's so obvious. It's really obvious where you go, oh, they're not going to get it. And lots of tech companies and lots of, if the founder gets it, and often the founder doesn't, because often the founder in tech companies is a tech dude who's just developed a thing and can't get their head around brand. I think brand is acquisition or logos or whatever. And you go, oh, fuck, you're fucked. You're not fucked. If your tech's good enough, doesn't matter. You can do it anyway. So if you've got a strong brand on top of strong tech or whatever, then you're right. These things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. You can have both. You can have a strong brand and strong functional foundations, or you can have one of those two things. So it's not just the only way to go. But we work with a superannuation company, and the CEO of his superannuation company gets it. And then they're having conversations with their chief investment officer to frame their investment advice or just be aware of the brand when they're talking to the market.
Yep.
And when you see that happening, you go, oh, cool, this is cool. The whole organization is starting to understand what this is about. And that gets exciting. That's exciting to me.
Yeah, okay.
But I definitely see it. Like the legal team, they're the last people to get what the brand's about. And they're often the ones who need educating. But we worked with Art Series Hotel and ended up selling to Mantra for 260 million. The Deegs created that. And their brand positioning was art-inspired experiences. We worked with them on that. And then we brought it to life with a whole lot of different stunts and different ways of building that brand. One of them was a stunt called Still Banksy. And Still Banksy, we invited people who come into the hotel and there was a Banksy art piece of artwork. And if you could steal it, you got to keep it. And that was the whole thing. So lots of people try to steal it. Eventually somebody stole it by impersonating somebody else and they stole it. But on the legals, on the T's and C's, we spoke to the lawyers and we said, just stuff in the T's and C's, be cool, art thieves are cool. And that was in the T's and C's of the competition. And they were just willing to go with it. And I still
okay.
So anyway,
that's not common to say that. What's changed in the industry? Well, obviously lots of things have changed, but what's changed the most, I guess, the most significant changes that you've seen in the last sort of maybe decade or two that really stands out?
There's two aspects, I think, to what I do in the industry. It's number one is constructing the brand of what a strong brand stands for. Number two is how to communicate it. Yeah. The foundations of what makes a strong brand is still stay the same, but how that brand's communicated has been completely turned on its head. And perhaps the most biggest example of that is people like in the creator community and influence and so forth. So you have people like Mr. Beast who creates content and has got millions of followers on various social platforms. And then once he's got the audience, he just drops brands into his audience and they buy his burgers, they buy his chocolates or whatever. Whereas we used to have the chocolate and then find an audience. Now you're getting the audience and then you're giving them the brand. So I think that's the most fundamental shift is that you can be audience first, build a community, build your ecosystem, and then give them something to buy. Yeah. Rather than have something to sell and then finding an audience for it. That's been the most fundamental shift. Yeah. And then within our industry, the one that's now here is AI and completely upending the means of production and content creation. And that whole model's obviously been completely upended.
And that's still evolving, right? Because we're still in the early days of that. What does that mean for a business like yours? Is it exciting because now you can be really creative, that in terms of you can still be just as creative as you always were, but in terms of
you can be much more creative.
Okay.
It's a perfect way to articulate it. We've just got more platforms to choose from, more different ways to be creative, more different ways to produce interesting content and ideas and so forth. So we're a creative agency. We're part consultancy, so we take on. So people might come to us for consulting services in terms of brand or brand growth, we're part creative agency, media agency. We're also part production company. There's a whole lot of companies within the marketing advertising industry that are just production companies. So all they do is make content, make ads and so forth. Okay. Yeah. Those companies, their business model they'll have to work out a different way to make money rather than bringing everybody to a film set to make
because they're done.
That's not happening anymore.
Their business has been reduced to a paragraph of prompts.
That's right.
Oversimplifying, but
that's right.
The point's there. Yeah.
But they're still going to need people to write those prompts and play around and stuff on the computer and so on. But it's going to be a very different thing to what they're doing now.
How do you see that in the years ahead? Obviously, as a creative person who thinks differently, it must be like a kid in a candy store being able to look at what the future holds for creative people in terms of what is possible in the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because if I was just purely creative, I would be soaking it up. But one of the things I think we've done quite well at Thinkerbell is looked at the business model, look at what we need to offer, look at what the clients are requesting and trying to build the model around that. So in the world of AI at the moment, what we become is the experimental playpen. So there's lots of governance issues for them. There's lots of security issues that our bigger clients have, where they're not quite sure how to embrace AI or what to do with it. So we can be their playpen and kind of start to experiment with them and take on some of that risk that they perhaps can't do. Yeah, so that's fun.
What would you do differently if you're starting over today?
My mum used to say I was blessed with no ambition. And so
I love that.
It's unreal, right? It takes all the pressure off. And so
even to describe you as blessed with even that part.
it's just great. And I really feel very lucky to have created what I've created. So I find it a hard question because I just feel like, oh fuck, this is good, isn't it? Fucking hell.
Yeah.
From somebody who was struggling at school, and then I just wanted to be gainfully employed, and I didn't even think I could ever get gainfully employed, and then I was able to manage that, albeit in the prison system. But I wouldn't mind knowing everything quicker, compressing it all, but like getting all the lessons and starting life earlier. Yeah, I don't know. I reckon no matter what, I reckon there is a lot, and on your podcast as well, you hear a lot. You've had a lot of really successful people who have been driven and disciplined in their achievement, so to speak. And I do think there is something to be said for just pulling back a little bit, just look around and go, whatever it is, pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And some of the questions I've been asking lately and talking to people about it are things like, what is success? What is success to the individual person? How do you see success? Everyone's got a slightly different answer. Often they're similar, because of the type of people that I'm talking to. But I think that's a really interesting concept to explore. But the other question I've been looking at lately, and a client who passed away, it was a client for 20 years and 85 and passed away. And you look at their life's work and what they sacrificed to achieve what they achieved and all those things. And I think it's a really interesting concept because this podcast talks to people about what they've achieved and the success that they've had, whatever that might be, and how they did it. And that's the point of it, is to talk and to distill those attributes and traits and habits where we learn from people who have achieved how they did it. But I find it really interesting when you look at it from a philosophical point of view around, was it worth it?
Yeah. You need to, maybe in your introduction, you need to say to everyone, right, you're about to listen to a podcast on how to achieve. I want you to now go and listen to another podcast about how to be satisfied with what you've got and almost offset because you are creating some dissonance. So people listening to this, there'll be some dissonance between what they're doing and what they want, or else they wouldn't be listening to a podcast about how to achieve. And so maybe the opposite part of that is just saying you do need to just focus on what you've got is pretty bloody good. And which is why I love this kind of concept of being blessed with no ambition and going, wow, imagine if you really did have no ambition. And obviously I must have some, or else I wouldn't have done what I've done and blah, blah, blah. But it's a pretty good start point because then from there, anything you do, you've excelled.
Yeah. See, I find that sort of stuff really interesting. And that's part of why I do the podcast. I think it's interesting. It's the podcast where it started from was in many respects, I talked to people who I saw to be very successful, but they weren't necessarily on the front page of the AFR. So it was like, there were so many really successful people who, for whatever reason, didn't necessarily tell their stories, or there were stories out there that I thought, wow, that's amazing. And so there's that. But then there's also, this is the podcast that when I was 18, I would have wanted to have listened to, hear from people who have done, because I hadn't done it at that point and I wanted to know how. So that's who that's sort of for. But then as you go through, you have those discussions around what is enough and why are you doing things. And I think I really do love the blessed with no ambition, because my dad was a little bit like that. And I think he was a really happy person because of that. And I look at people who have achieved at the very highest end, whether it's a Michael Jordan or a Tiger Woods or whoever it might be. And everyone looks at that as success and the great achievements, but there's usually some underlying psychological driver where they're damaged and they're driven by those, and it doesn't necessarily come from a healthy place.
Yeah.
And I think that part's interesting too, right?
Yeah. Every superhero is an orphan, they're all basically avenging their parents' death. And so that's what's driving them. And you look at Jeff Bezos, and recently he was in the news and his wedding not being able to be in Venice, and then he was having a foam party on the beach. And just looking at him going, oh my God, what has gone wrong with that guy?
Yeah.
Like you really have fucked it
I
royally.
honestly saw a photo of them this morning and thought exactly that.
That's right. But, you know, but he's just trying to get by.
Yeah. It's the same for everyone. And I think that's really interesting. What about people, when you look at people in life and in business, and maybe it's broader than business, even though this is about business, it is also about life. Who are the people you've looked at, maybe close or from afar, that you admire the way they go about things?
I've always loved to mix business and personal life. I've always, if I've got a mate who I like hanging out with, I like them. I like to do work with them. I like to build business with. So I had a flatmate whose name was Paulie, and so we were flatmates, and then she became she started off as my EA at Naked, and then she became my head of people, and now she's basically running Publicis Group, which is a big holding company in the APAC region. I really admire her for her understanding of culture and people. Then there's most of the people I really admire are people I've worked with and learnt with. So there's a couple of other guys, a guy called John and a guy called Matt, and I really respect those guys. People I've bumped into over the years, and one of my supervisors when I was at Corrective Services, a woman called Anne Young, once said to me, you can never get more excited about the prospect of change than your clients can. And so if you, as a psychologist, if you're ever saying to your client, patient, come on, you can do it, you're fucked. Because you can't drag them along. You have to lead from behind or just drop little seeds for them to pick up. And I really like that. And that kind of phrase, never been more excited about the prospect of change in your clients, I've taken right through my life. So I admire her as well. So it's just more people I've learned from, I think, is how I'd frame that.
Yeah, okay. What about any books that you'd recommend that particularly of interest to you, including any of your own?
Anything by the first one was good, The Advertising Effect. The second one I wrote in a bit of a rush. So just try to read the first one if you want to read one. Anything by a guy called Irvin Yalom. So he's a psychiatrist. He's now got, so I've read all of his books. He's written a lot, but his latest book, Tales from the Heart, an hour and a half or something, Tales of the Here and Now. The guy's got Alzheimer's now, and he can only see his patients for an hour, and he can only see them once because he never remembers anything about them. And so the whole book is about these 1 hour segments, which is co-written with his son to help him write the book. And it's all about how he tries to be as helpful as he possibly can within the hour, because that's all he can do. And then it gets back to that whole concept about we operate in patterns of behavior. He dissects what's happening in the moment with the patient and then gets an insight and then feeds that back to them about how they're interacting with him. And so that's probably happening to that person over their whole life, and plays it back and then gives them that kind of insight to help try to change their behavior. And that book I read about 6 months ago, and that concept has just stayed with me a lot. So when I see people, I almost am assuming I've only got an hour, so I'm going to try to be as helpful as I can with you in this hour. And then if anything happens after that, then great.
Was there a particular type of project that you worked on that was a favorite? You look back and really enjoyed it for a particular reason?
One of the things I like to talk about, which I've spoken about a fair bit, is there was a brand called Coke Zero, which we launched into this market. And we try to launch it with people, not against them. And it was the most successful FMCG launch ever in Australia. And one of the ways we helped launch it was we got 1,000 influential people and we gave them 2 cases of Coke Zero, a case for them to enjoy themselves and a case for them to research with their friends and say, what do you think about it? And got them to write down the details and send them back to us. What basically happened was in that by the time they'd finished that, you'd had 24,000 people who are now personally invested in the launch of this new, not so sugary soft drink, Coke Zero.
Yeah.
And so anything where I start to see the consumer, or we market with people rather than push messages against them, personally, that's the kind of marketing and advertising I like, and I like doing it on big brands on big scale. We also work with them on Share a Coke, where we put the names of people on Coke cans.
Oh, yeah.
And again, it's a similar kind of thing where you're getting people to share a Coke rather than just say, buy a Coke. We're asking people to get involved and get a Coke and find someone's name and give up to that person. I like those types of things where you're co-creating brands with people and not pushing them against it. Yeah, those kind of things happen often.
Yeah, that's what you guys do.
Yeah.
What's next for the business? What's the years ahead hold?
We've just acquired an agency about 8 months ago, and that's a CX agency. And so that's now helped round out the offer. So we can take a brand and kind of run it right through the whole customer experience. And so that's been really exciting. And so that to me is interesting. Back to this kind of when you ask what's a really strong brand, it's brands that have a strong proposition and can roll it from the inside out. And so what's next for us, I think, is getting more focus on how to make sure everybody internally within the organization has got the memo as to what the brand's about and knows what their role is in building the brand. And that's becoming increasingly important as companies work out how to make sure their own assets and their own people understand the brand and push the brand forward rather than just speaking to consumers. So that's probably next at a Thinkerbell level. And then I do like to do the other social experiment, and I've got a fun social experiment which we're doing in about a month's time, which will create some interesting content, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, okay. Adam, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been really insightful and very interesting. Appreciate your time.